want to thank you first for doing this. So,
Thank you for inviting me.
I want to talk to you about historical fiction from the lens of a writer, and what first drew you towards writing historical fiction.
Historical fiction was through specifically historical detective fiction. Now, what happened was that when I was about 13 years old, I read this book called The Chinese Maze Murders by Robert Van Gulik. It's a Judge D mystery novel. Now, what was the thing was that Robert Van Gulik, he was a Dutch diplomat who was posted in China for many years, and he became this, ardent xenophile, and he did a lot of research into Chinese detective novels. Now, what happened was that the Chinese, around the Middle Ages and in medieval China, there was this real life character called Judge D. And he was apparently a very famed magistrate, and he solved a lot of crimes and all that. And the Chinese was so fond of him, and they revered him so much that they actually concocted novels about Judge D. Right. And the Judge D novels were good detective novels, but they had these odd things where Judge D was helped by a ghost, or he got sort of clues from the spirit realm and things like that. So Robert Van Gulik decided that he would first of all translate the novels into English, and he would also update them for a Western audience, and sort of do away with the ghosts and things like that. So he created this whole bunch of very interesting novels, and they are fantastic historical detective fiction. So I read one of those, and I was quite taken up because the history was fantastic and the mystery was fantastic. So that was where I think that was where the seed was first sown. And then later, my sister, first of all, she's a historian, Swapna Liddle. So when she was studying history, I was like, that got me interested. And then when she got married to somebody who reads only historical detective fiction. So my brother-in-law, he started lending me his collection. And I read, I think, like hundreds of books, which were historical detectives. And, from all across the world, all sorts of eras. And I realized, I said, there's not a single Indian historical detective back then. And I was like surprised. I said, India has such a rich and such an interesting history. So why not? And because there was none, so I invented him. So that was how Muzaffar Jung happened. And the thing was that because I enjoyed that so much and I did so much research into the history of that period, that I realized, I said, okay, maybe sometime down the line, I should do something which is not historical detective, but just historical. So that was how it actually began.
I want to ask you this, but fiction allows us, in a way, to capture and dwell upon ordinary lives. And that's what even you've done through your stories.
Yeah.
So would you tell us a little bit about your writing, and how was it when you tried writing these characters? How did you go about it?
First of all, for me, in fact, my sister also, Swapna, also says this, that please don't think of history as dates. Sadly, that is how we are taught. In India, the way we are taught history is always through dates, through eras, mostly through the political lens. And whereas I always feel that for me, the more interesting thing is to try and see how people lived. What did people eat? What did people wear? How did they interact socially? So that for me is the more interesting angle of it. And even when there is, say, something politically important happening, I try to look at it from the lens of somebody who is actually not part of that political uh, event. So they don't have a part to play. They are not sort of being part of king making or whatever. So that for me is the more interesting bit of it. So I tend to write not about kings and queens and all that, which is what a lot of other Indian historical fiction writers do. A lot of the writing is about royalty, but somehow I'm like, I'm not really interested in that, because a lot of that is actually in the, if you go looking for on Wikipedia even, you will find the stories of how emperors live their lives and things like that. What I find more interesting is how did ordinary people live, and that's what I do. And I tend to sort of go, like, for instance, in the Delhi Quartet, which is about regular ordinary people against 800 years of Delhi's history. I try to see how something which is happening in the background affects people who are trying to get on with their lives. So that's I find that a way of bridging what everybody sort of knows. You may not know the details of it, but you do know that okay, 1526 Babar came, and at some point in time there was Akbar and there was Shah Jahan and things like that. So we may not know the details, but we have some sort of vague idea of what was happening. But I want to bring in the details for the regular people.
Talking about your writing in particular, like, is there a struggle one faces in order to, represent them not just as belonging to that period, but being, beings in their own self? And do you think there's a sense of timelessness in how people were and how we are today? What connects us?
Human emotion does not change, human nature does not change. So I go with the assumption that okay, I try and put myself in the shoes of my character. So if I am faced with this particular dilemma, how would I behave? So for instance, in my book, The Garden of Heaven is set in Delhi at the time when Prithviraj Chauhan was defeated by Muhammad Ghori, right? So this is Delhi's first encounter with a Muslim invader, right? The first encounter also with a religion which is, in at least in a sort of in a violent, aggressive sort of way, with a religion which is not theirs. There might have been traders and all coming in from the West before, but this was the first time an invader came in and destroyed temples, right? And to turn them into a mosque. So my protagonist there was a Hindu boy called Madhav, and he is with this old man who is a stone carver, Balram. And Balram has taken Madhav under his wing because Madhav has got orphaned after the after the battle of Tarawi. So when the temples are destroyed in Delhi and the mosque is going to be built, Balram decides to work at the mosque, and Madhav is like, he cannot understand. I tried to put myself into Madhav's shoes, that how would Madhav be feeling, right? That he feels that you are betraying us. You are also Hindu, and you cannot see that this man destroyed these temples. And then I try to put myself into the shoes of this older man who is older, wiser, more mature, able to see why this is not a religious thing. It is a political thing. He says that, it's all rulers have to show that they are now in power. So when he is destroying these temples, he's not destroying the temple as such. He is destroying a symbol of power, and he is putting up his own symbol of power. So I'm trying to, it is a bit of a juggling act, and sometimes I cannot find a way to sort of figure out what is how somebody would respond in that situation. But well, my core idea is that emotion does not change, human nature does not change. So that's the way I go.
Historical fiction stands somewhere between being loyal to research, hard and rigorous research, and the freedom of your creativity and the art of storytelling.
Yeah.
So where does historical research end and storytelling and imagination take over?
Boundary as such, they go hand in hand. One thing which I always have to make a lot of effort to do is to rein myself in, because sometimes when you've done that huge amount of research and you've discovered all these interesting facts, you want to sort of put it all in, and that makes sometimes for not very good storytelling, because you have to contain yourself, you have to control yourself, no matter how much you may want. So what I do now is I generally sort of talk about things which I feel are absolutely essential to the story. And yes, pretty much all the historical background I put in my stories is authentic. So it is well researched. Where I have taken any sort of liberties, I tend to put it in the note, in a historical note at the back, saying that, okay, this was where I took some liberties with the truth. But mostly, if I find that there is some sort of detail in the research which I've not been able to get through, no matter how much I research, then yes, because it is fiction, I usually take a little detour so that I skirt that fact completely.
So I want to ask you this: that has there been a moment, during your research for writing a book, where possibly you came across facts or material which changed the direction of your storytelling or what you had in mind?
That I'm doing some sort of research, and suddenly I realize that, oh, this is something I need to put in. So for instance, right now I've recently submitted the third book in the Delhi Quartet, and in that there is one in the early 1700s, there was this riot which happened in Delhi. It was called the shoe sellers riot, and it had very interesting sort of sort of setting, and it was an interesting, though otherwise not very well known. I mean, everybody knows about the invasion of Nadir Shah and all that, but very few people know about the shoe sellers riot, which happened earlier. And while I was researching Nadir Shah, etc., found a mention of the shoe sellers riot, and I decided, okay, let me check it out fully. And it sounded so interesting. I said, okay, I must put in at least something about this, and sort of draw some sort of conclusions from what happened. So sometimes it happens that there is one tiny little detail which I decide, okay, I will put this in. So but yeah, it is mostly not very, does not often happen. This is occasional.
I think through our conversation and our exchange of ideas about this discussion, you mentioned the thought that people now indulge in, I would say, simplified and bite-sized versions of history. Do you think that history is especially vulnerable to oversimplification?
I think because if you actually see how history is, what history is, it is very complicated. It is very complex. It is very nuanced. So for instance, let's talk about one of the most the people who right now most in the limelight is Aurangzeb, for instance. Now, Aurangzeb, everybody knows that he is guilty of a lot of bigotry, and a lot of what is said about him is true. That he did sort of impose the jizya, and he did destroy temples, etc. But then, what a lot of people do not realize also is, for instance, that of all the Mughal emperors, the emperor who had the largest number of Hindu mansabdars was Aurangzeb, right? Now that is, people might find that like, okay, how do you marry the two? Now, the problem, what many people do not take into consideration is, like, for instance, what I said before about, the destruction of temples to show your own power, is that a lot of what was happening is not driven by religion, it is driven by politics. Right now, but to understand that, you have to go into the depth of history. It's very nuanced. It is very complicated. It is much simpler to just say, oh, Aurangzeb destroyed temples, right? So then what happens is that anybody who's hearing that does not go further into the thing to try and figure out what was actually happening, right? So it is simpler. It's a lazy way to learn history, and so you learn incorrect history, right? So I think that's why it happens.
Can be this, that while we oversimplify, that we as people search and constantly look for certainty in life. And when it comes to history, we're constantly trying to identify villains and heroes, but not understanding the complexity. So is that something what you feel as someone who's been so deep in the subject, and you write about it too in your own way?
Yeah, I think it happens. And you know what? Indians are particularly fond of sort of idolizing people and victimizing people. So, like, for instance, I write about cinema, right? I write about classic cinema. I blog about it. And there are so many times when I have had people commenting on my blog, and they go ballistic when it is somebody, when it's a star they don't like, right? They will go on and on and on criticizing that person. And if it is somebody, like, for instance, I praise singer A, people who are fans of singer B will come and say, no, singer A did not have a single good song, singer B is the one. So we get a very hyper, as they say, about people we like, and we sort of want to negate everything that might be there. We see only in black and white. A lot of Indians unfortunately do that. We tend not to see shades of gray. And I think that what you are saying actually fits into that. So it's not just about our favorite singers, our favorite sports stars, our favorite actors. It's also about you know uh, personalities, political personalities, or whoever. We take the same route with them. I know there was this book written by Govind Pansare about Shivaji, right? So I've not read the book yet, but apparently this book got banned because he said that Shivaji had a lot of had a lot of Muslims in his army and things like that, and he got lambasted. And you go on Goodreads or something, and you will see the sort of comments which Govind Pansare received because of that, right? Because people have this sense that, okay, Shivaji was upholder of Maratha pride against Mughals, which is true, but again, nuance. We don't like to see the nuance even. Forget about wanting to see the nuance. We don't want the nuance because we have Shivaji as a hero, as a Maratha hero. So we don't want to hear anything against that, our idea of what a Maratha hero should be like.
On this, can we become better readers of history through reading historical fiction, which in a way, helps one get more curious about the past? So, what are your thoughts?
Exactly. This is something which I've long talked about, and I always say that what I think of my writing as history light. So if you don't want to go into reading, the big history, the big historians, or you just want a starting point, that's what I would like to say. A starting point. You discover something through a novel or a short story, and you say, okay, I want to find out more about this. So, which is why I always provide a bibliography at the end of my book, so that if you want to find out more, you can go there and have a look. Or you can always reach out to me and I'll tell you where you should go to read stuff which you like. Of course, now there are a lot of historians who are actually writing things for the general public, so they're not extremely academic and stuff like that. So that is there. But yes, historical fiction definitely as a starting point for delving deeper, if you would like that.
You ever found yourself emotionally attached to a time and at the same time recognizing its flaws?
A lot with the Mughals, right? Especially with the later Mughals, say, for instance, Shah Jahan, Aurangzeb, because both of them had, while Aurangzeb, there's not very much you can sort of, at least as somebody who's not a historian, I'm just a history buff, I'm not a historian. I don't find anything very much in Aurangzeb's reign to sort of talk about that, okay, he did this, he did this. Maybe his wife's grave in Aurangabad, which is Bibi Ka Maqbara, is nice. But other than that, I don't see very much to talk about. But Shah Jahan, for instance, Shah Jahan now is, he is the total aesthete, right? So he designed these beautiful buildings. He was, some of the most beautiful things from the Mughal reign, from the Mughal period, are owe themselves to Shah Jahan's reign. But Shah Jahan himself is a very flawed character. Like, it's very likely that a lot of Aurangzeb's angst stemmed from the fact that Shah Jahan uh, outright patronized, was more biased towards Dara Shikoh. So when Aurangzeb might have received some sort of help from Shah Jahan was outright favoring Dara Shikoh. So it's very likely that Aurangzeb's angst and his eventual rebellion and everything arises. Shah Jahan has a part to play in that. And also there are other instances of Shah Jahan being far from perfect. Not even trying to be perfect. So Shah Jahan's period, I mean, on the one hand, I love the buildings he's made. I love the art and the applied crafts, and all the applied art and the crafts and all of that period. But at the same time, I find Shah Jahan himself very irritating. So, so that is there, So you always do. There is always this thing, but I managed to sort of, because I'm not utterly devoted to the period or whatever. So I'm like, I managed to find a midpoint, and I managed to be neutral about it.
What is it as a storyteller which brings you back to Delhi? And do you think cities hold memories even when people forget them or times change? How is it that you feel about the city?
First, why I chose Delhi in the first place was that, initially when I began writing, I first started writing as a story, as short stories. So at that time, did not really care about sort of my settings that much. But when I decided to write a novel, I realized you have to, a short story does not have enough scope often for you to actually dwell upon the city itself. But when I started writing a novel, I said, okay, now this time I have to, whether I like it or not, I have to talk about the city. And the obvious choice was Delhi, because Delhi is the city I'm most familiar with. I've been living here since almost the past 40 years. I came to Delhi in 1985. So I am very familiar with Delhi. And that is why when I decided to write, it had to be Delhi, and it had to be the Mughal period, because I find that very interesting. It's a very interesting period. Plus, of course, there's a lot of research material. To do research into Mughal Delhi is not that difficult as it is to do, say, into the Delhi Sultanate or something. Talking about the city holding memories even when people have forgotten. Yes, I think it does, So, for instance, you go to Old Delhi, you go to Chandni Chowk, and there is just off Chandni Chowk, there's one Haveli. There's one old Haveli called Khazanchi. Haveli Khazanchi. Now, Khazanchi would be treasurer. So, and this Haveli is like just off the main road. So it was obviously the mansion of somebody who was a very wealthy man, very wealthy and very powerful. So it's logical to sort of accept that yes, somebody who was treasurer would have you know that sort of clout to be able to build a Haveli which was very close to the main road. And you go there into the Haveli, which is it's like falling apart and it's in a really bad condition, but still you go there and you can see signs of what it must have been like. You can still see the architecture, you can still see the grills which show the way down into the Tehkhana, the basement of the Haveli, where during the summer the family would retreat to the basement and they would stay down there because it would be cooler, right? So you may not, as a passerby, you may not know the significance of, okay, what is this grill and why does it go down into a basement? But it is there. It is there. Just as, like if you go down there's one particular road down Fatehpuri Masjid, near Fatehpuri Masjid, called Katra Neel. And Katra Neel is full of Shivalayas. It's beautiful. You go down there's the mosque there, there's a famous church over there. And then there's this little road which is full of little Shivalayas. And it is beautiful. And you get a sense of the synchrony which was once there, which is now, it is still there actually, but we tend to forget about it. But yes, I think definitely the city holds memories even when most people forget. There are still always some people who do remember.
How has writing historical fiction changed your understanding of or how you are today as a person?
I think I probably understand the present better and the problems with the present. So for instance, just as a little example, I was reading this book the other day. It's called Languages of Freedom by Neera Chandok. It's just been released. And Neera Chandok is a political scientist and she's a scholar. And she said this very interesting thing in the book. She says that, do you know where this idea of Hindus and Muslims being different, how did this first come about? Because she said when the British Raj was set up here in India, when the British tried to establish their rule, they had to show some sort of they had to legitimize their rule. They had to show people that British rule is better for you than Mughal rule, right? So the way to do it was to try and vilify Mughal rule completely. So she said that a lot of what has been sort of for instance, the translations from the original Persian texts into English was done during the British period. And a lot of those focused only on translating things which vilified the Mughals. So if, we are talking about temple destruction, pretty much everything we read about temple destruction during Mughal period today it was all done during the British period. And she said that, you are looking at only a very skewed representation. If you are looking at what the British did, the British were, their whole sole idea was to somehow show Mughal rule was bad for you, British rule is going to be good for you. So that, and for instance, another thing, this was another book I was reading in which I read that when the British did a census, that was when they first actually said, okay, so many Muslims, so many Hindus, despite the fact that there were people who did not themselves know whether they did not themselves say we are Muslim or we are Hindu. And they often had, in fact, a very fluid sort of religion. So for instance, there was this actual thing about people saying that, we have Lakshmi ji at home and we have Ganesh ji at home, etc., etc. And some days we go for namaz. So in today's time, you would be surprised if somebody said that, okay, I go for namaz, but I have Lakshmi ji and Ganesh ji at home and I'm doing puja in front of them also. But the British could not handle that. They could not handle the fact that people have such a fluid religion. So they said, okay, if you're going for namaz, you must be Muslim. So we're writing you down as Muslim. So they did not take into account the nuance how Indians were. And actually now when you read all of this, if you read all of this and you don't get your history from WhatsApp, then you realize that a lot of our problems today stem from how the British dealt with it. And the British dealt with it because, first of all, they were coming in from a Western viewpoint. Secondly, they were coming in from a colonial viewpoint. They had to uh, divide and rule, actually. So I think researching history, even for writing historical fiction, leads me down interesting ways, and I come to hear interesting things. And it helps give me a view on what India is like today.
Historical period you wish that was written more about?
Ancient India, actually, because you know what, much as I like Mughal India, it has really been done to death. There are lots and lots of historical fiction writers who have written about Mughal India. I would love if somebody would write more about, write novels about ancient India. There are very few, but I think there are too few. And especially in the English language. I'm sure there would be in regional languages and all that, but I wish there would be more in English, or at least translated.
A historical misconception you wish would disappear?
That the Mughals were like really black. This is like, it has become this sort of, I really find it very irritating. And I want to tell people, please, yeah, there were Mughals who were like really horrible, especially Aurangzeb, but there were others who were not so bad. So don't blackwash all of them at the same time.
One thought that you would want readers to leave with when they finish a book written by you?
I learned something I didn't know before.
Thank you. I have to thank you for giving your time. Yes, it is. It's
Thanks.
been an
Thanks,
absolute pleasure.
Devika. It has been for me too. Thanks so much, Devika. Thank you.
Yeah.